Hey everyone, welcome to the Asbury Park Storytellers series, where we're going to be speaking to the people who are the heart and soul of Asbury Park, the people who, without them, Asbury Park wouldn't be what it is today. And our very first guest is a true Asbury icon and legend, and that's Henry Vaccaro. Hi Henry, thanks for coming on.
Hey, nice to be here.
Now, we're sitting in the
Johnny Cash
Suite
yeah.
at the Berkeley Hotel in Asbury Park, and it's named that because Johnny and June Carter Cash actually lived here, and in fact they were part owners of this hotel. Now, I'm not sure a lot of people know Johnny Cash had this deep connection to Asbury Park. I think a lot of people, they hear Asbury Park and they might think of other musicians and other singers, but you were actually pivotal in bringing Johnny and June to Asbury, and the story is really fascinating. So, but what I want to do is I kind of want to rewind and go through how all this happened, how Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash came to live in this room, and I'm not sure we ever get there.
Okay.
Without, going through this pretty deep connection that you have to Asbury Park and to this specific hotel, starting with your grandfather. I mean, he worked here, right?
Yep, my grandfather had the landscaping contract in 1925 to put the landscaping around a Berkeley Carteret Hotel. And they couldn't pay him, so he took stock in lieu of debt. And I still have those stock certificates.
That's great. And it doesn't stop there. I mean, this place played a pretty big role in your life growing up, right?
My mother and father were married here in 1939. And my dad, who was a doctor, was knighted at a testimonial dinner in 1959 in the Crystal Ballroom of the Berkeley Carteret Hotel. My dad was a maverick. He took care of all the poor black people in town that nobody wanted. We're talking about the 40s and into the 50s. He had office hours 7 days a week. The only difference on Sunday, he did not have evening office hours. Picture that. Morning, noon, afternoon, evening office hours, and then make house calls every night. My mother was his nurse. He couldn't keep nurses because he would wear them out. And so all of his patients, a group of 25 black patients, put together a committee and gave my dad a testimonial dinner for his 25th anniversary as a doctor, held right in his hotel. Somehow, I don't know the connection, but somebody mentioned it to an emissary of the Pope, and they sent over a courier, and they knighted my dad into the Order of St. George in Corinthia for humanitarian deeds. The dinner was Sunday evening, which meant he could have afternoon office hours. Then he went home, changed, put on a tuxedo, and attended the dinner. And he received this award, which he wore around his neck so proudly. And after the dinner, he went out and made 3 house calls till after midnight. And the last patient that saw him was a black man on Borden Avenue who made a comment, "Here comes Jesus Christ dressed in a tuxedo." Mm-hmm. My dad went home and he died the next night of a massive heart attack, 51 years old. That's amazing. So that's my connection to Asbury and to the hotel. And I was eventually married here in 1960. And that's...
So now take us back to 1957, I think, which is around the time you became a fan of Johnny Cash.
All right. Being Italian, you're usually connected with Frank Sinatra. I love country music, and I heard on the radio this haunting sound, "I Walk the Line." And I just loved it. I went out, nobody even in town had Johnny Cash albums. I had to go all the way to Trenton to get my first Johnny Cash album, because if you listen to country music, you were a hillbilly, you were a hick. But I just loved Johnny Cash. And my dad was, for my 17th birthday, my father shocked me. He bought me a brand new red and white Corvette as a birthday present. Nice. And the way it happened was, we're driving downtown. He was making house calls during lunch, and he pulls up to the Park Chevrolet dealership. And he said, "Look at that car." I said, "Wow, that's some car." He says, "It's your birthday present." Now, this is in July. I said, "Oh, my God, I couldn't believe this." I mean, I couldn't believe it. So I convinced him to get the car early, and I would park it in the driveway, drive it up and down. We had a little porker shear, and I would drive it under, and I would wash it. And I would blast Johnny Cash on the radio. On the stereo, right inside the house. And I knew every Johnny Cash song. And, I kind of got addicted to Johnny Cash music.
What was your first concert?
First concert was in Symphony Hall in Newark, New Jersey. And the second concert I went to was 1969, Madison Square Garden. Johnny Cash was the first performer to sell out the new Madison Square Garden. And back then, they didn't have Ticketron, they didn't have all this stuff. I mean, it was word of mouth, basically, or on the radio. And I mean, the first performer to sell it out.
So now what's interesting is you two actually became friends. Like, I mean, you two became very close friends. And I'm not sure a lot of people can say that. I'm not sure a lot of people can say that.
I can't believe it. I mean...
So what's interesting is you two actually became friends. I mean, like, close friends. And what's interesting is a lot of people... They can't say that. They can't, say that they were a fan of someone and ended up being...
And got a picture with them.
Yeah, right. They might have got a picture, but they didn't become friends. And the way that happened is a really interesting story that seems to start back when you worked in construction and some guys came along and they wanted to rent some space from you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. All right, I was in the building construction and, I mean, big time stuff. I built in hospitals and schools and high rises But I was just a builder, which meant I took all the risk. You're fighting with the unions. If you're lucky to get the job, and if you pray you didn't make a mistake when you bid too low, and then you try to get paid at the end. So what I tried to do was build an industrial park, so I would have a future income stream coming in. I bought a piece of vacant property, and every year my goal was to build a building. So by 1976, I had constructed 6 buildings in the 10 to 12,000 square foot size. And my construction office was in Neptune on Highway 66. And one day a young man comes in with a realtor and they want to lease some space to start a guitar company. I'm interested. I says, tell me a little bit more about it. And I showed him the space. He said, this is perfect. He said, well, we have this revolutionary guitar with an aluminum neck. He says, this is going to be the hottest thing in the industry. And I looked at it and I says, are you looking for any investors? He says, well, maybe. I said, well, could I borrow a guitar after I put the deal together to rent the space? And he gave me a guitar, and this is the way that this worked out is crazy. I had a construction superintendent named Bill Ryan. Bill came to work for me in 1963, and he never missed a day's work in 30 years until he retired. Bill had a son, Billy Ryan, and poor Billy just passed away maybe a month ago. He was probably the hottest guitar player on the shore, and he played with Springsteen and Norman Selden and all the early guitar players in the upstage and the whole 9 yards. So I asked Bill to take the guitar home so his son Billy could look at it. And Billy comes to me the next day. He said, wow, he said, this is something. He says, a couple of problems. It's very heavy because this was an aluminum neck made out of an extrusion, and it was kind of neck heavy. And the body was heavy to try to compensate for the neck so that it would be a balance. But he says, if you could clean this up, he said, the sound is incredible. He said, when you pluck the string, the sound keeps resonating. He says, I'd take a chance. So based on that, I agreed to invest in Kramer Guitar Company.
All right, so here's what I love about this. You actually found a way to leverage the guitar business to meet Johnny Cash. You even got Johnny Cash's entire band to use those guitars when they played at the Garden State Arts Center, which is now the PNC Bank Arts Center. One night, talk about that a little bit.
Okay, as I mentioned, my main business was building construction, and I had probably a $30 million contract to build a brand new hospital in the Meadowlands. Back then it was called Riverside Hospital. I think it was eventually changed to Meadowlands, and I think it was just recently sold. But it was a private hospital owned by 5 doctors. The president was a Dr. Cavelli, Paul Cavelli from Union City. So I had a good relationship with him. Prior to that, I built JFK Hospital in Edison, and I built the original Freehold Hospital. I built the addition on South Amboy Hospital, and that led me into the Meadowlands job. And I'm sitting in his office, and he was really pissed off because the bank was not going to lend him any money to complete the project unless they hired a professional management company to run it, because they felt doctors were not good at managing money. So they engaged the services of a company in Nashville called Hospital Affiliates. And I'm sitting down in Dr. Cavelli's office waiting for him to come in. I'm thumbing through this brochure of hospital affiliates. And I see a photo of a man who's on a board of directors named Dr. Nat Winston. Coincidentally, several months earlier, I had read Johnny Cash's autobiography, The Man in Black. And he's talking about Dr. Winston, with June's help, got him off the pill habit. So I arranged for Dr. Cavelli to call Nashville and talk to Dr. Winston so I could meet Johnny Cash backstage at the Arts Center when he was performing the following spring. So that's basically how I got to meet Johnny Cash. But when I met him, I didn't introduce myself as a contractor. I introduced myself as being in the guitar business because I wanted to have something in common. And I told him about the guitar. He said, wow, he says, that sounds pretty interesting. He says, we're staying locally at the Hilton Inn at exit 105 in Eatontown. He says, why don't you come by tomorrow morning around 9:30. I'll introduce you to Bob Wooten and Marshall Grant. Well, Marshall was the original bass player, and Bob was his guitar player after Luther Perkins died. And I'm shaking. So I go over there, and I'm telling you, there's God is overlooking me all the time. I don't know why. I meet Marshall Grant. Well, the House of Cash, which is Johnny's office, had arranged for a guitar manufacturer to meet Marshall Grant that day. He doesn't show up. I show up, and Marshall thinks I'm the guy. I'm perfect, right? Well, within 20 minutes, they're in my car on the way over to the Kramer factory, which was only down the road in Neptune, maybe 5 miles away.
And meanwhile, some poor guitar guy is probably
I don't know if he
out
ever,
in the parking lot or in traffic somewhere.
Well, that night, the Garden State Arts Center, the entire Johnny Cash band played Kramer guitars. Marshall played a Kramer bass. Bob played a custom Kramer, and Jerry Hensley, the rhythm guitar player, played a standard Kramer guitar. And I have photos of them on stage. I was elated.
That's great.
That's my first introduction.
So give us a little bit about give us some context here. What year is it now? You know, maybe you can give us a quick snapshot of your life at that point, what it looks like, and maybe even what's happening at Asbury.
Now that's 1976 when it happened, 1976, 77. And Asbury is in decline. Okay, it started way back in its heyday. Asbury was probably one of the premier resort towns along the whole Jersey coast. Between Atlantic City and New York, you had Asbury Park. Okay. A lot of things happened which started to cause a decline. At one time, Asbury Park supported 2 railroad stations, North Asbury and the main station. That's how many people traveled and commuted. Wow. And in the summer, buses would come into town. Well, with the advent of a couple of things, the Garden State Parkway, old hotel stock in Asbury, and air conditioning. People could go further south on the Parkway for the same amount of time it used to take you just to come to Asbury, into uncharted areas in Ocean County and all undeveloped beachfront communities down there. And the declining hotel stock, there was nothing new built in Asbury, since the 30s. Right. And what was built in the 50s was garbage. And no amenities or nothing. And then you had race riots here in the late 60s, and that kind of was the death blow. And to top that off, you had the mental hospital was closing down, the one in Marlboro, and they were allowing all mental patients to move into old hotels and old rooming houses in Asbury Park. So by the early 80s, there was 1,600 outpatient mental patients living along the beachfront in Asbury Park.
And how about yourself? Like, are you living here at that point? You're living close by?
Okay, I was born in Asbury Park, born on 509 4th Avenue, 4 blocks from here. About 1946, we moved to Interlaken. My dad bought a beautiful home in Interlaken, and that's where I basically grew up, in Interlaken, the next community to Asbury Park. I went to Holy Spirit Grammar School. And then 7th and 8th grade, I went to military school. It was probably the best thing that ever happened. I mean, I was not a bad kid, but the structure, I went to Bordentown Military Institute. And what they taught you is...
So my parents were right when they threatened to send me to military school.
Yep, if they sent you.
They didn't.
It was good. And my cousin John Hune was there, and it was a great experience. And I came back and I went to Asbury High School, and I went to Villanova University for a year and a half. When my father died, I quit school.
And at this time of these stories here, when PNC Bank Art Center and the guys are playing, they're playing Kramer guitars. Where are you living at that point?
At that point in time, I'm living in Deal. Okay, I got married in 1960, and I built myself a home in Ocean Township first. Sold that, bought a home in Deal on Norwood Avenue. Sold that and bought a magnificent home right on the ocean. I had a private beach and a guest house right on the ocean, and number 1 Clem Conover Road in Deal, New Jersey.
So now, then something happens, and that really took your friendship with Johnny Cash to a whole new level. And it started with a call from Johnny's sister, Reba. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Johnny, at this point in time, in the late 70s, early 80s, had an apartment in New York. He loved New York. Had an apartment on Central Park South that he sublet from Liza Minnelli. But an apartment in New York, a 2-bedroom apartment in New York, is like a closet. I mean, it was so tight. I mean, so I would, sometimes we'd go drive into the city to meet him there, and I would always bring him some Italian food. Prosciutto and gabagool and jambot and all this stuff, the local, and they loved Italian food. My son Henry would go with me because John Carter would be there, Johnny's son. Okay. So we developed this friendship. Now, one day I'm in South Jersey on a construction site. No, not at a site, looking at a job, and all of a sudden I get a phone call, and it's Reba, that's Johnny's sister. She says, Henry, we need your help. I said, what is it? She said, Johnny's not feeling well. I got to get him to the hospital. He's got a staph infection, and they want to put him in the hospital in New York right away. And he says he won't go to any New York hospital. I got to get him to Nashville. She said, June is in London. She's staying there with Carlene Carter, which is June's daughter, who was married to Nick Lowe. She was doing a show on Piccadilly Circus, and June spent a couple of weeks there. Johnny flies to their New York apartment with John Carter and himself. So Reba says, can you pick him up? I got a Learjet coming into Teterboro. Can you take him to Teterboro? And can John Carter stay with you? Now, this is the first time his son ever left his side without a bodyguard or a family member. He stayed with me. I shot up to New York. I picked him up, took him to Teterboro. He flies to Nashville. John Carter comes. I was divorced at the time, and I would bring John Carter to my ex-wife's home in Short Hills, and he spent a week or 10 days there with my son Henry. Even went to school with Henry. So as it turned out, Johnny had a bleeding ulcer and a staph infection, and they had to do surgery on him because he was losing a couple of pints of blood a day. And after the surgery, he's addicted right away. I mean, he was so tenuous. I mean, he would be addicted to morphine, anything he'd get addicted to. Now, I want to make one thing clear. He was never addicted to heroin, cocaine. It was amphetamines and uppers and anything that could affect your mental state, he was addicted to. So he gets addicted to morphine, and right away the family has an interdiction, and they want to put him in take him away. They admit him to Betty Ford Clinic. I was the only non-family member that was allowed to visit Johnny Cash at Betty Ford Clinic. I went all the way out there and visited him. I'll never forget, it was a Sunday morning. Excuse me, Lou Robin was also there. Lou was his manager who lived in California. And Lou was out there the same Sunday I was out there. And it was funny. He says, you know who's in the next wing over here? He says, Elizabeth Taylor. And they kind of had a little thing. I don't know if there was anything romantically, but somehow she always liked Johnny Cash. And that was proven when Johnny Cash was roasted in Memphis, Tennessee. She took an entire page out in the program and just said, love Elizabeth.
Oh, that's great. So obviously at this point, now you two are buddies.
Yeah, we are.
So let's talk about Asbury for a minute. So it's the 80s, and Asbury's going through some rough times. Now, I'll tell you, personally, I used to come down here probably in the mid to late 90s, and I would go to the Springsteen holiday shows or the rehearsals that he would do.
Yeah, then it was starting to happen, but...
Yeah, but it was still in bad shape, and people have said, or it was starting to kind of come back, but it was still, a little bit, sketchy.
It was rough.
Yeah, a little rough. And people always tell me, they say, look, the 80s was even worse. And the way I understand it, you can kind of clarify this for me, but the way I understand it is back in the 80s, there was a lot of talk of redevelopment in Asbury, especially up on the boardwalk. And there was I guess there's no other way to put this, there was a pretty shady deal that was about to go down that involved the sale of pretty much the entire boardwalk, but you stepped in and saved the day, so much so that there were bumper stickers, from what I hear, that people had on their car that said, "How do you spell relief?" VACCARO, which was a take on the old Rolaids commercial of "How do you spell relief?" ROLAIDS. Tell us about that.
Well, a lot of people today should know that story, but they don't. Okay, all these new people who moved into town, they have no clue.
Yeah, this is a big story.
No clue. Yeah. Okay. I used to do a lot of big game fishing down in the island of Bimini, and I took a 5 or 6 day fishing trip. And when I come home, I read in the Asbury Park Press that next Thursday at the city council meeting, they're taking bids to sell the entire beachfront. I said, what's going on here? So I attended the meeting, and a man submits a bid by the name of Robert Oberst. He had a company called Ocean View Associates to buy the entire beachfront from the casino building at the south end all the way to the north end to a site called the Marine Grill site, and included all the pavilions on the beachfront. It included the convention hall, the Paramount Theater, the 7th Avenue pool, and the other pavilion for $2 million. I said, something's wrong here. So I did a little investigating, and you could not even get an insurance company to come down and give you a quote on the insurance in 7 days, let alone put a bid in of that magnitude. So I went to court and I stopped him. I got a temporary restraining order and I stopped the bid. And I mean, everybody's pissed at me. I said, I don't care, something's wrong here. So the judge ruled in my favor, and he said I would let the city accept the bid, but I will not let them award the bid until there's a hearing in my courtroom. Okay. Well, Robert Oberst, first of all, he was an insurance salesman. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with insurance salesman. I mean, but that was his profession. He had no experience in developing. Mm-hmm. I was not a developer, but I was a builder, which meant that I built for someone who put the development together, i.e. a hospital, a school, a high-rise, whatever. But at least I had that experience, and I could get a bond. So I went to court, and I got a stop. But over the weekend, the Asbury Park Press interviewed Mr. Oberst, and it was a kiss of death. They asked him if he had the money. He said, "No, I don't have the money, but I'm sure I can raise it with a private placement." I mean, come on. You're going to sell the crown jewels of the town for somebody who doesn't even have the money? So make a long story short, I killed the deal. Now, I then also, there was a man named Ted Murnick who owned the Monroe Towers, the biggest building in town. And he also jumped in on a suit to block the sale to me. Oh, excuse me. So now I convinced the city to put pre-qualifications in. I says, if you're going to sell it, you better get pre-qualification with somebody that can prove they have the money and that they can get a bond to guarantee the completion. Well, I was the only company that pre-qualified. And I put a bid in of $2,750,000, and then Murnick went to court to stop me from buying it. And he was right, okay? I mean, at the time I was pissed, but he was right. He said, just buying the beachfront does nothing for the rest of the town. Mm-hmm. You really need to encompass this into some kind of master development. And he says, if you do that, I want to help you. So Murnick joined with me, and then I went and met with the mayor, and I convinced the mayor that they've got to set up a redevelopment authority or something like that. He says, can you help me? Well, my attorney at the time was Alan Davis, and he was a partner in the Willentz, Goldman, and Spitzer law firm. Willentz, at the time, was one of the premier attorneys in the state. In fact, old man Willentz was the attorney general of the state of New Jersey in the Lindenberg kidnapping. So, I mean, and his son-in-law was Leon Hess. Okay? I mean, talk about it. In fact, after the war, Leon Hess would buy these Liberty ships, these oil tankers, and he named one the Willentz. So anyway, Alan Davis and I meet with the mayor, and he brings with him another attorney from their firm, and the mayor liked the idea, and he passed a resolution to hire the Wilentz firm to set up an authority. They brought on board a woman by the name of Ann Babineau. Now, at the time, the most successful redevelopment in New Jersey was the New Brunswick redevelopment. Wilentz was the attorney for that, so it kind of made sense. So Wilentz becomes the special attorney in charge of redevelopment. Ann Babineau did some investigation and found out that under the city's charter and the size of the city, you could only have one development agency in the town, and that was already designated to the housing authority. So they had to get the housing authority to relinquish control of anything east of Grand Avenue. So after that was done, they set up what was called a Waterfront Redevelopment Advisory Board. And the mayor agreed. He says, you know, we've got to get politics out of this. And they set up a board that included prestigious businessmen with ties to Asbury Park.
Right.
Okay, at the time, the first chairman was Jim Rifficy, vice president of Amarada Hess. Jules Plangiers, the editor of the Asbury Park Press. I'm trying to think of the other gentleman's name, who was the president of the New Jersey National Gas Company. It's called the senior moment. I can forget names myself. And then you had Frank Anfuso, VP of Mid-Atlantic Bank. Peter Beal, the vice president of National Community Bank. And then you had a local undertaker, James Hunt. And that comprised...
So these are the right people.
The right people.
Yeah.
And they met with the mayor, and the mayor agreed to take their advice. Oh, James Dolan was the president of the gas company. So, I mean, prestigious people, all with interest in helping the city get developed. The first thing they did is they hired a planner. They really wanted the Rouse Company, who was the developers of South Street Seaport, but Rouse wanted like 2 years to study it. They engaged a firm in Philadelphia. It eventually became Norman Day Associates, and they became the planner. As a result, they held studies in the town, and it probably took a year. And they had council meetings. I mean, a council meeting would last 3 to 4 hours, where they would explain everything. They had everybody's input. And the plan was designed to help the residents and businesses of Asbury Park, not some Wall Street firm like you have today. Okay, everybody was to be involved. And what they did is they carved it out into 10 subsections, A, B, C, D, E. Okay, each subsection had another little designation. And in that block, they would show a tax map, and they would show the property in the block that they wanted to develop. And if you owned property in the block, you could develop your own block as long as you developed it in accordance with the master plan. So you could get all the property owners together. If a high-rise was to be built there, you get your group together, and you can either sell it as one or build a high-rise, which was perfect. It helped everybody. But also there was a power of eminent domain if you try to gouge the deal, right? So they put it out to public bid. You could bid on one subsection, 2, 3, 4, or the entire project. Well, at the time, we had already bought the Berkeley Carteret Hotel, my brother and myself. This is now 1983, 84 area, and put out the plan. But my brother and I, at the time, owned 21 parcels of property. We had a piece of property in every subsection. Whether it was vacant property, whether it was a motel. At the time, we owned 3 motels. We owned a gas station. We owned a couple of restaurants, a bar, the Palace Amusements. And the idea was whoever becomes a developer, they at least have to deal with me. Not from a greedy standpoint, but from a point, I want to get to construction. That's my business. Okay, right now I'm building in Trenton, I'm building in Secaucus, way down in South Jersey. I mean, this is my hometown. So they put the thing together, and they took bids, public bids. This was not any shady stuff under the public bids. But I certainly didn't have the money to do a major project like that. I didn't have the financing. I didn't have the connections. I had the ability to build, and I could get a bond up to $50 million, but I didn't have the wherewithal to do a $1 billion project. And one day I got a phone call from George Michaels. George Michaels owned a restaurant in town called Michael's Restaurant, which is probably right on the beachfront here. And And he was Greek, and all the Greeks owned candy shops or restaurants on the boardwalk as well. So, I mean, they're all interested in getting the town back. He says, can I invite you to lunch at Deal Country Club next week? He says, I want to bring Ernie Anastas down. He's a friend of mine. So, sure, I met Ernie Anastas.
Ernie Anastas, the newscaster.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Now, there's another story with that. This guy, Ernie's wife was from Asbury Park. Her father was the Greek priest. And back then, a Greek priest could marry. So, and Ernie was stationed in the army at Fort Monmouth, and he's looking for a church. And on Sunday morning, he comes down, he meets Kelly Koutros, and after he gets out of the service, they get married, and he has an affinity to help Asbury Park. So he came down, and he became one of my investors in the hotel. Ernie became the second investor. Johnny Cash was the first. So Ernie says, hey, I got a close friend, which he brought with him, a man by the name of Dick, another senior moment. It'll come to me. Okay. Who was a VP of Cushman and Wakefield. Big time realtors in New York. Sure. And they wanted to help me find a partner in the development. Of course, they'd get a fee and they'd be involved in some way. The first meeting is with Donald Trump. They set a meeting up with Donald Trump. It turned out, I wish I could remember Dick's name right now. But anyway, he was the best man at Robert Trump's wedding. So he was very close to the Trump family, and have a meeting in the 66th floor of Trump Tower. And, he said he wasn't interested in Asbury because his plate was full with what he was doing in Atlantic City and New York, and I thanked him. Next, they introduced me to a man named Joe Carabetta from Connecticut. Carabetta's claim to fame was he built and owned over 12,000 apartment units in Connecticut, in the Boston area, and a place along the Boston coast. It was another seashore resort town. And he was from Meriden, Connecticut. Carabetta shows up at my office. He's got a Navy pea coat on from the Second World War, a T-shirt, and he had a handlebar mustache, and he reminded me of my grandfather, this little old Italian man. And he comes into my office, and I had a bust of Johnny Cash there, and this guy loved country music. I had a big mounted blue marlin on the wall. He loved deep sea fishing, and we hit it off. And we put together a partnership, and he was the money guy. And my brother and I owned 1/3, and Carabetta owned 2/3 of a partnership called Carabetta Vaccaro Developers. And we put the bid in, and we were the successful bidder.
When there was that deal going on that you stepped in and stopped, did you have any aspiration to even do all this, or did it all just happen because you stepped in to stop it, and then it kind of just almost snowballed?
Okay, this was my hometown,
right? And
I loved it. I mean, when I grew up in Asbury in the 40s and 50s, I mean, again, like I said, we lived in Interlake. We would walk from Interlake into the boardwalk, walk down the boardwalk, and go to the Paramount Theater, and go to the shows and conventional. I loved the town. And it had such history, I wanted to save my hometown.
So you mentioned that Johnny Cash became an investor in the Berkeley Hotel as well. I want to kind of step back and go back to that story, because it's kind of an interesting story of when you went to a movie set and you were talking to June Carter Cash, talking about Asbury. Take us through that and how that all happened. Okay.
I received a phone call from Bob Wooten. I got to backtrack just a little bit about this. I became really close friends with Bob Wooten after they started playing Kramer guitars. Whenever Johnny was playing whatever area, they would send me his tour itinerary, and if there was any place along the East Coast, I would show up at the show, and we became really good friends. And I invited Bob and Earl Ball, his piano player, on a fishing trip to Bimini in the Bahamas. And the first day, Bob hooks into a giant tuna, probably over 1,000 pounds, and it popped the line, and now all of a sudden he's addicted. I mean, if you ever hook something like that, you're instantly addicted. So anyway, we had a great time. We stayed at a place called the Bimini Big Game Club, and one night, after dinner, there was an old piano in a corner, an upright piano, and they had this black guy named Roddy playing a guitar. So Bob says, can I borrow your guitar? He borrows the guitar and sits down. Earl gets on the piano, and we looked on the back of it. It was last tuned like 5 years earlier, so it was out of tune. But these guys put on a show that night worthy of a Carnegie Hall I mean, it was incredible. So they were so charged up and they loved the trip. So Bob says, boy, you ought to invite Johnny. He would love this. Well, in some ways, I'm shy. I thought, I can't ask him, and I didn't. So now I'm on Johnny's tour bus. I forget where we're going. And John says, come on back here, Henry. He says, Bob was telling me about this place in Bimini where you go fishing. He says, I would love to go there. I says, you would? He said, I would love to. He looks at his calendar and says, how about next June? Great. I booked it, and Johnny Cash goes to Bimini with me. So anyway, so now Bob calls me and he says, hey, we're doing a movie in Georgia. Johnny wants to know if you want to come down and spend some time on a movie set. I said, oh my God. I forget the year, maybe 82.
What's the movie?
A movie called Murder in Cayeta County. It's a true story of a sheriff named Lamar Potts, which Johnny Cash plays, and a land baron, which was played by Andy Griffin, who commits murder, and he killed a black man. I don't know whether they were smuggling or something. Anyway, he gets convicted by the testimony of a slave. This is the first time in the history of the South that a white man is convicted on the testimony of a black man, and this is that true story. So I fly down. They have a company car, picks me up at the airport, and I go in this swamp area called Griffin, Georgia. And what Johnny did was, since the movie set changed from location to location, they used his tour bus as a portable dressing room. So we'll pull right up to the site. And then he would go out and shoot his movie or his part, and they come back. And so now I'm on the bus alone. Johnny's out there shooting, and June says, come on up front, Henry, and talk to me. So the bus, as you walked in, had this little seating area, had these like two banquettes facing each other. And then you would walk through a private door, and that would be Johnny's area. There would be a bathroom there. Then we walked through another area, which was a little kitchen, and in the back was June's area. And I'm sitting up front, and she says, tell me something about you, about your family and all this stuff. So I'm telling her about Asbury Park. And, I remember my mama telling me something about playing in Asbury Park. Now, her mama was Mother Maybelle Carter of the Carter family, the first family of country music. And I got a history lesson. I mean, you could talk to June for hours. And she's telling me all these stories, and she's telling me that how popular the Carter family was. And she said, we're going to be on the cover of Life magazine. We were supposed to be on the cover of Life magazine. I said, really? She said, but something happened. It was the first week in December of 1941, Pearl Harbor. We never got on the cover. Got bumped big time. So anyway, she's telling me, and I had some photos that I brought with me of the convention hall, of the Berkeley, of the town, and I showed. She, oh my God, this is beautiful. Now Johnny gets on the bus after his shooting. He had an old sweaty, first thing he takes off his shirt, goes in, wipes down. And I mean, it's like 100 degrees now. Grabs a Coke out of the refrigerator and sits down. And the first thing she says, why, John, look what Henry's wanting to buy. Because at the time I put a bid in to buy the beachfront. So he looks out and he says, man, that's an incredible place, Henry. Are you going to buy it? I said, I'm trying to. He says, well, if you get that, he says, I want to open it up for you. I want to be the first performer for the revised convention hall when you get it. And he says, it won't cost you a dime. And man, I'm saying to myself, I says, I got chills now. I mean, this is my idol I'm talking about, right? So I said, Johnny, I can't accept that. What do you mean? I says, I'm not your friend to take from you. He says, that would be such an honor, but I would like to pay you what anybody else pays you. But if you'd like to take that money and make an investment in a hotel, we could work something out.
Oh, all right.
So I says, let me think about it. I don't think anymore about it. 2 days later, Gary Baker, his CPA, flies down or drives down from Nashville to Griffin, Georgia. Johnny introduces me, and he says, this is my friend Henry, I was telling you about this. He says, can you make time to go to Asbury Park and look at this project? I'm saying, oh my God. So I made arrangements. Gary Baker comes to Asbury Park. He approved the deal. He saw what it was, a private placement, and Johnny and June became my first investors in the hotel.
And they ended up right here.
Here,
so we get right to where we are right now.
Except I have photos when the hotel was under construction and June came and picked out the carpet.
That's correct.
It was something.
So you got a lot of memories in this room. So There are also two other stories from around this time that you got to tell. You told me, and I just love them. The first is the one where Johnny comes to Asbury to the city council meeting. Tell us about that one.
You have to picture this is 82, 83. Nobody believed that I even knew Johnny Cash, let alone that he's going to come to Asbury Park. I mean, okay. So I had just spent a week in Florida on a tour with Johnny. I mean, I used to just get on his bus and go. Wherever they go, I'm on the bus. And that tour sticks out in my mind because June was in the hospital and she couldn't perform. So Carlene, June's daughter, took June's place on the show, but he also brought with him Steve Goodman. Now, Steve Goodman wrote that song, The City of New Orleans. And Steve was ill with leukemia. He only had a couple years to live, and Johnny wanted to help him out and took him on the tour. Steve opened up the show for Johnny, and I get to be good friends with Steve Goodman, which was another incredible thing. So we're having dinner this night, and Johnny says, well, you know, Henry, if I'm going to be involved with you in Asbury Park, I should be seen there. So, oh, my God. Yeah, he says, I'm going to come to Asbury Park. He says, Reba will call you and set it up. Again, Reba's his sister. I fly home. I completely forget about him. A couple weeks later, Reba calls and says, Johnny's coming to Asbury tomorrow. And he's flying into Newark Airport around 11 o'clock. Well, coincidentally, there's a city council meeting this night. It wasn't even planned. So I quickly called the mayor and I says, I'm going to bring Johnny Cash to the council meeting. Oh, my God. Okay. So I'm on my way to Newark Airport to pick up Johnny. And back then I had a two-way radio in my car like most of the contractors had. I had a big base unit and a big antenna in my office. And I get a call from my office and it's my secretary, Helen. Says, base to car one. She says, got a problem. What's the problem? Reba just called. Johnny missed the flight. The next flight is a couple hours later. He's going to fly into LaGuardia at 12:30. So meanwhile, I shoot home, and he's got a limo that's going to pick him up. His driver's name was Kurt, and I arranged for one of my guys to drive me to LaGuardia and drop me at the airport. And as soon as I get there, thank God, Johnny's walking off the plane. We get in the limo, off we go. He says, definitely going to Asbury Park. He says, but I got a problem. He says, I got to stop at my dentist for a couple of minutes, and I got to stop off at Columbia Records. Okay, what am I going to say? So we drive down, and he goes into the dentist. I sit in the limo. He comes back down. Now we drive over to Black Rock, which was the office of CBS Records. Come on in, Henry. I'm going in, and he's negotiating a record contract, and I'm sitting in a conference room with Dick Asher, the president of Columbia Records, and Johnny Cash. And Johnny introduces me. He says, Dick, this is my friend Henry. He says, we're heading to Asbury Park. He says, I'm investing in this hotel. And Dick says, what hotel? I told him the Berkeley Carteret. Oh, I remember staying there in the late 30s with my parents. He says, if you need another investor, let me know. Okay. So now, by the time the meeting gets over, it's got to be 5 or 5:30. The council meeting is at 6 o'clock. No way we're going to make the council meeting. Well, back then, there were no cell phones. This is, early 80s. And to try to get out of New York at rush hour, forget it. You're going to take an hour to get through the tunnel. Mm-hmm. So by the time we get out of the tunnel, I asked the driver, Kurt, to pull over to the service station in New Jersey on a turnpike, and I make a phone call. It's probably 7:30 now. And I called there's no phone in the council meeting, so I called the police department. And I asked the captain if he could go over and tell the mayor that Johnny Cash is coming, but probably won't get there till 8:30 or 9 o'clock. I said, if they can wait, we'll be there. Well, sure enough, we pull up. Not one person left. And it was a magical evening. I knew everybody's name. You know how sometimes you go in, Johnny, I knew everybody's name. Didn't forget anything.
They believed you now, though, that you knew.
Well, did they believe. Now, Johnny Cash walks in. He's got this big cowboy duster on, these Andy Jackson boots that are laced to his knees. The duster had a cape on it, and inside, the color was maroon, kind of almost like my shirt, right? You would think the Pope arrived. I mean, everybody's ready to kneel down and kiss his ring. And I'm telling you, there was electricity that night in the council meeting, so much so that the mayor arranged for the Public Works Department to escort us down to Convention Hall in the Paramount to open the buildings up at midnight for Johnny Cash to see it. Next day it was all over the newspaper.
I love that story. And the other story that I want you to tell is the one about the antique show.
Yeah, this is another crazy story. I got the stories. Thank God I remember. Okay, again, about the same time period, people still were skeptical about Johnny Cash. The hotel, the renovations were underway, but you could only see it from the outside. There was a fence around the place, and you couldn't see what was really going on. So this man had an antique store on a corner of Sewell Avenue and Main Street. Years ago, when I grew up, it was called the Checker Stores. There was a store that sold appliances and car parts and stuff like that, tires. And they went out of business, and it became an antique store. And the guy's name was Tony, I forget his last name, whatever. Anyway, he had a big sign in the window. We buy for cash, we sell for cash, but we need Johnny Cash, and we need him now. All plastered over the window. So Johnny and June come to check out the Berkeley while it was under construction. This is the night that she picked out the carpet. And I'm taking them over to Christie's restaurant in Wanamasa for dinner. So as we're driving down Main Street, I show them the sign. And June says, we have to stop, pull the car over. So we pull the car over and we get out. It's about 6 o'clock at night. And, the man's name was Tony Houston. And we get out and I get a picture. Thank God I had a camera, get a picture of Johnny next to the sign. So we knock on the door. It's about 6 o'clock at night and the place is closed. And you hear this voice, sorry, we're closed. Now, at least we know somebody's in there. Johnny knocks again. Hey, buddy, I don't think you understand English. We're closed. Johnny knocks again. You don't fucking understand it. We are closed. And Johnny yells out. He says, excuse me, sir. I see by the sign in the window you're looking for me. He says, here I am. And I'm telling you, that place, it went crazy. The guy yells upstairs. His wife comes running down the stairs with her right slipper on the left foot like something out of Lucille Ball. And she almost trips, and they became the best of friends. And they would even buy antiques from this guy. And he came to this very apartment sometimes and had dinner with them.
Yeah, that's great. You know what's interesting, too? I'm surprised that you hear all these stories. The city council meeting, the antique store, and even just Johnny Cash and June living here.
Yeah.
But, people, I just feel like people don't know that. Why do you think that is, that the story or Johnny Cash's connection to this town just isn't well known? I mean, I get that there's a lot of new people here, but it's not part of the DNA or the stories of this town. Why do you think that is?
Johnny Cash did more for helping this get redeveloped than Springsteen or Bon Jovi did. Okay, they came to town and did, but he would actually put his money in the town and wanted it known that he was going to live here. And they did a concert. Johnny Cash and June did 3 concerts at the Paramount. Mm-hmm. One was tied in with the grand opening of the hotel. Mm-hmm. And this night is another night that I'll never forget. To look outside and see this big tractor trailer, Johnny Cash show, backed up unloading equipment to the Paramount Theater. I mean, I couldn't, as much as I love Johnny Cash, never believe he's even coming to my hometown, right, let alone being my partner and going to do a show. June gets on stage. First of all, the mayor gave Johnny the key to the city. Ernie comes down, was the MC for the show, Ernie Onassis. And June gets up and starts talking. She says, this place has a little musty smell to it. She says, when Henry gets finished, it's going to have a nice smell. He says, you want a good smell? Go to Piancone's restaurant in Bradley Beach. That's the best smell in the whole world, because I used to bring them Italian food from Piancone. And she says, when we first met Henry, I pictured him as making these guitars, wadded up in his garage, making Bob's guitar, because I used to bring guitars to Bob. She says, I used to say, let him in. He probably don't have enough money to buy a ticket. We'll give him a ticket. So then I found out he owned a whole company and this big construction company. And he says, that's why we're here, for my friend Henry.
That's great. And
anyway, I got some incredible memories. And then one thing that's very important to me is that Johnny got me to go back to church. It's a very moving story. Back in, I want to say the early to mid-'80s, Bob Wooten gets married in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and I'm in a wedding party. So I flew out to Nashville, and then I went with Johnny in a Learjet to go to Meridian, Mississippi, or Meriden, whatever, Meridian, Mississippi. And then we took a van to Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the wedding was. And what's interesting about this wedding is in Philadelphia is where the 3 civil rights leaders were murdered. I don't know if you guys ever saw that movie, Mississippi Burning, but the sheriff in this town killed these 3 civil rights leaders because they were trying to get blacks to vote. The sheriff was at the wedding. And you go to this town and you see pickup trucks with the Confederate flag and a gun rack. And behind the church, they had a little ante area where I changed in my tuxedo. And if we walk in, the doors of the church open, and they're not playing Here Comes the Bride. They're playing Dixie as they walk down. Do. Okay. Behind the altar is a Confederate flag. And they get married. After the ceremony, Johnny says, well, Henry, you got to get back to New Jersey, don't you? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, I got a Lear coming in. I'm going to Teterboro, and John Carter and I are going to New York. Can I drop you off there? It's okay with me.
It's a great ride.
Right. Take off, and it's thunder and lightning. The plane is shaking. I'm over here in a seat on the right side. Johnny's on the left. In the back is John Carter. He's laying down sleeping. Johnny's reading the Bible. I don't know what I was reading, some magazine or something. He says, you know, Henry, I never hear you talk about God. What church do you go to? I said, Johnny, I don't go to church. How come? And I went just like this. I said, it's a long story. You don't want to hear it. Yes, I do. I'm saying under my breath, oh, shit, what am I going to tell him? Well, tell him the truth. I was brought up Catholic, but I got disenchanted with the church for a couple of reasons. One was I was building a major high school, Catholic high school in a town called Piscataway, called St. Pius, and I'm having trouble on the job. The architect made a lot of mistakes, and he tried to have me cover them up, and I wouldn't do that. So he tried to throw me off the job. I had an audience with the bishop. The bishop hired a new engineer to correct the mistakes, and he said, young man, then I'm in my probably late 20s. He says, I have to have my school finished. He said, I want you to go back to work. So we'll make sure you get paid, and then at the end, we'll sit down and work out all the problems. I said, yes, Your Holiness. I knelt down and kissed his ring, did all the right stuff. I said, Johnny, they never paid me. I says, I sued him and I won. I'm proud. I took on the Catholic Church and I sued him and I won. He says, Henry, he says, you know, the bishop is only a mortal man, and he sins too. He says, there's a God up there. You should go back to church. And I'm trying to yes him to death. I want to change. I said, you know, you're right. I just want to, I don't want to talk about church. Now, this is the 80s. Everything I touch turned to gold. I own a guitar company. I own a house on a beachfront in Deal, New Jersey. I own a hotel. I own a construction company. I've got an industrial park. A few years later, my whole world is falling apart. I'm having problems in Asbury Park with the development. Got problems with the hotel. I got problems with the guitar company. I'm getting divorced. And one Sunday morning, I woke up about 9 o'clock and I hear this voice, Henry, go to church. Turned the TV on a little louder, pulled the covers over my head, went back to sleep. 11 o'clock, hear the same voice, Henry, go to church. And I got chills. Probably one of the hardest things I did, I got dressed. My mom always wanted me to go back to church. She was still alive then. I snuck in a side door of Mount Carmel Church, which is on Asbury Avenue, and I got this peaceful feeling, not knowing what was going to happen in the future, but I knew I could handle anything that would happen to me. Okay, not knowing I'm going to go bankrupt and lose everything I worked my whole life for, but I knew I could handle it. Maybe a month or so later, I get a phone call from June. Henry, we're coming to the Berkeley for the weekend. Can you arrange for a limo to pick us up at Newark Airport? I said, of course. I said, but I'll pick you up. You don't need a limo. And tell Johnny I went back to church. I don't know what even made me say that. She says, he'll be so proud of you. Okay. Pick him up. She says, Henry, June said you went back to church. I said, I did. She says, how was it? I said, it's okay. Said, you go every Sunday? He said, yes. What service do you go to? I said, I go to 10:30 Mass. Come by the hotel and pick me up. I'm going with you. Now, Johnny is Baptist. I'm Catholic. The next 5 times that Johnny Cash ever came to Asbury Park, he went to church with me, including the Sunday morning after being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Saturday night at the Waldorf Astoria. He came to Asbury Park to go to church with me the next day. Just one other little thing which is kind of fits into this whole thing is,
So
we had a new priest at Mount Carmel named Father Daniel. And when Father Daniel said the homily, you listen. He had a powerful voice. And I wanted to kind of meet him. And so I invited him out to dinner. And he said, did I see Johnny Cash in church? I said, yes, Father. He said, tell me about it. Is he your idol? I said, well, you could say that. We're just very good friends. I said, well, who do you like, Father? I said, who's your idol? He said, Billy Graham. I said, wow, that's strange. A Catholic likes Billy Graham. He said, I love Billy Graham. A couple of months later, Johnny Cash called me up. He says, I'm doing a crusade in Central Park with Billy Graham. Would you like to come? I said, can I bring Father Daniel? He says, of course. So they sent a car down, and we go up to Johnny's hotel in New York at the Plaza Athénée, and all of us pile in, and we go backstage, and Father Daniel meets his idol, Billy Graham. We all had dinner that night.
You not only went back to church,
How about
you went back to church.
I went back to church.
So let's go back to that. Let's go back to that shady deal that was close to happening. What does Asbury look like if that ever happens?
Right. Who knows?
Can you imagine?
No. I can't even imagine. All I can say is I feel that I'm the guy that helped bring it to where it's at somewhere today. If I didn't save this hotel, first of all, my brother and I bought the hotel for $325,000. We saved it from the wrecking ball. The city was going to take bids to tear down this hotel. This is the cornerstone of this whole development. I mean, look at it now. I mean, it's magnificent. It's got, you can't buy this.
Well, let's talk about that. We're sitting here. We're in the Berkeley today. I mean, how do you feel walking through the halls? I mean, even sitting in this suite. I mean, what are your thoughts on what it's become, how they're doing here, where it's going?
Okay, it's a long story. After I lost the hotel, I was devastated. I put my heart in here. It wasn't just money. Sometimes things are done for other than money. I wanted to restore it, and we restored it to its elegance. If you look at these ballrooms, they were restored with Italian plasters, how they were in 1925. When I bought the hotel, it was boarded up. The ceiling was falling down, and I asked the guy, his name was Perfida, that I bought it from. I said, what were you going to do? He says, the greatest thing, he says, is the ceiling is so high, you can drop a hung ceiling, nobody will ever know the difference. I couldn't let that happen. The guy even tried to burn it down and collect insurance money. So I believe I saved it from the wrecking ball. And after I lost it, it was a crime. Because in 1989, 1990, we had what was called a nationwide savings and loan crisis. 1,200 banks failed all over the country. And 5 banks that we're doing business with failed. Central Jersey Bank, the Toms River Bank, which had the first mortgage on a hotel, Marine Midland Bank, they were curtailed in their mortgage lending, Riverside Savings Bank, and then the Bank of Boston was curtailed. And it just killed everything. So at the time, the high-rise had started. There was a high-rise called the C8 building, a 16-story building right down the street where the new 16-story high-rise is, that is owned by a company in New York called iStar. Carabetta, who was my partner, we got a mortgage commitment of $50 million from the Bank of Boston to build a high-rise. And it was predicated on sales. As long as you're developing the sales, they'll keep funding it. Carabetta set up a sales office, and within a week, the whole building was sold out. That's how popular it was. Some had backup units. Some had 2 and 3 backups on the units. Well, the Bank of Boston advanced $18 million, enough to get 16 stories up in the air of steel, get the precast skin on. Then they pulled the plug. They pulled the plug when the savings and loan crisis hit, and it just killed everything.
That stood there for a while, that steel structure.
It stood there for 8 years. Yeah. I mean, not many people can say they built a building and then blew it up. I blew it up too.
Yeah, no, really.
So,
interestingly enough, where that building is now, one of the apartments in there is probably the cost of what they were going to buy the entire boardwalk for back.
More than that. They're looking $5 million for one apartment in there. So get back to the hotel. After I lost the hotel, just prior to losing it, I mean, we couldn't afford to make our payments on the mortgage payment in the hotel. In 1988, city had a major problem with the sewer plant. I have to backtrack a little bit. In the early 1990s, the city received an award for the sewer plant as a state-of-the-art sewer plant. All summer, they collected all the sewage in these giant underground concrete tanks. In the wintertime, they pumped it out to the sea. Okay, untreated. Okay, so now they upgraded the plant, everything. Make a long story short, it couldn't handle the capacity. And on the 4th of July weekend, all the tanks are ready to break. They let out millions of gallons of raw sewage into the Atlantic Ocean. As it would have it, the wind blew it back to the beach, and it killed that summer, the next summer, and the summer after that. Asbury was sued by all these other towns, and it destroyed the business in the hotel, and we're having trouble making our payments. The next thing, the hotel was designed to get the bulk of its income from the convention hall in the off-season, where you had trade shows, the boat show, and hunting and fishing, physical fitness, which all gave you room business and food and beverage business, because we're 100 feet away from the convention center. That collapsed. So we're having a problem. I got 6 of my limited partners together, heavy hitters financially, and we all flew to Marine Midland Bank in Buffalo, New York, because at this time, Tom's River Bank had failed. Marine Midland held a second mortgage, and we asked them to restructure the debt, personally guaranteed. We only owed $6 million, and they refused. The hotel went into foreclosure. They had a sheriff's sale, and the FDIC buys the hotel back for $1.
Oh.
I'm gone. Okay. This is what really pisses me off. And I'm not mincing any words. I only found this out after the fact. The FDIC comes to meet with the city council in 1992 area. New city council's in place. They offer to give the hotel back to the city for $1. We just want you to forgive the real estate taxes. We're going to give you the hotel because we know how important it is to the city. These dopes refused.
The city council refused.
They refused. Never told anybody publicly. Never even let the public know that it happened in the back room. Okay. Now, when this new city council came in, the first thing they did was they fired Walentz, Goldman, and Spitzer.
Oh, who was
the redevelopment council.
Yep.
And they fired the entire waterfront redevelopment board and appointed themselves.
Oh.
Nice, right?
Convenient.
Okay. I'm not going to mention any names. But they refused to take the offer. Instead, one of the council members went out and solicited Maharishi Yogi, the guru of the Beatles, to buy the hotel. He wrote a letter to the FDIC, which he had every right to do. Also had the Howard Johnson restaurant write a letter to the FDIC, and he also had Rita Morano, the head of the taxpayers, write a letter to the FDIC. The only problem was he wrote the letters. How do I know? Thing called the Freedom of Information Act. I got the 3 letters. They were all done on the same word processor. How can you tell? Because he spelled Berkeley Carteret wrong the same way on all 3 letters. That councilman later resigned. Okay? Meanwhile, the damage is done. Maharishi comes in, pays $500,000 for the hotel. The city gives him a certificate of occupancy to open up while owing $600,000 in taxes. And he doesn't open it up as a hotel. He opens it up as a treatment center and Vedic University for transcendental meditation.
And what year is this?
In the early 90s.
Okay.
I did everything to stop it, but I was powerless. I'm now out of business. I went bankrupt, and I'm a nothing. From on top of the world, you're nobody anymore. And the hotel was eventually sold to a Korean company. The Korean company eventually sold it to the new owner. And for all those years, I wouldn't set foot in the hotel.
So you only stepped foot in this hotel recently?
Recently.
What do you
Only because of the Manzos.
Okay.
Okay. I reached out to them when I found out that they were going to be involved because I liked what they were going to do. And they embraced me. They say, you're part of this history. So we formed a relationship. They're incredible people. They're honest people. And they put on a good product. And they're doing the right thing. They're opening a nightclub. And they want to call it Johnny and June's. They want me involved in it. And they made me feel important again. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here doing this interview with you, because of the Manzos.
So besides Johnny and June's connection to the town, what are some of the things about Asbury's history that people don't know but should? Like, for example, I was surprised to learn about the city's role in World War II.
About what?
About the city's role in World War II.
The hotel was taken over by the British Navy in World War II. It was the only piece of real estate named after a ship. It was HMS Asbury. And why? Because in order for a sailor to be paid, he had to be stationed someplace. So you can't be stationed in a hotel, so it was named a ship. And that's how he was able to get his pay. They took over the Berkeley Carteret Hotel and a Monterey Hotel behind it and put a fence around it, and it was HMS Asbury. And what it was the British, they used it for R&R during the war. And they would come over here, get a little bit of rest, and as ships were being built along the coast all the way from Maine to Norfolk, Virginia, they then would get on their ship and sail them across to wherever the battle was, whether it was Anzio or in France someplace, but they all stayed here. I have some beautiful letters somewhere with memories of them staying in the hotel.
That's great. So let's say I'm a person who's moving down to Asbury, and I'm not going to get one of those $5 million apartments, but I'm moving to Asbury. I haven't been here before. What's something you want? What should I know about the history of Asbury? What do you want me to know?
Well, first of all, it's rich history, okay, of a melting pot, okay, and where people, just the fun years. I mean, what's missing is things for families to do. Okay, right now, it's things for Wall Street people to do, very rich people. In other words, because it's close to Asbury. Sure. I mean, close to New York. Sure. That's why they're trying to price everybody out. They don't want you here. They don't want your kids on the boardwalk. They don't want a carousel. They don't want a Ferris wheel. They don't want the amusement games. They want fancy restaurants.
Yeah. What's the thing today that's happening that's most similar to let's say the old days? The things that are most similar to maybe the good old days. The things that do make you look at it and go, "I'm glad they're doing that."
Well, again, I want to say the music, okay? Sure. Because Asbury is known for its music. Yeah. It really is, and you got to keep that alive. I'm glad the gays moved into town because they helped stabilize the town and restore some of these grand, homes that were going to be, sure. In the 70s, you had homes that would be cut up into make them 2 and 3 family homes. They've redone that, and I mean that's a good thing. Yeah.
What's the biggest, let's say, misconception about Asbury? The thing that people might think that you're like, no, that's not. That's inaccurate.
That is crime ridden. Okay, it's not. I mean, you have the west side of town where you have some poor blacks still living there. I mean, but it's nothing compared to major cities. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to live here and raise my family here. Right. It's a beautiful place. It really is.
What's the one thing that if you asked somebody, you would know immediately if they were from Asbury? Young or old, Asbury, that's the thing that only Asbury people know.
Palace Amusements, probably. I don't know.
Well, Henry,
I don't know.
This has been great. Thank you so much for the time. I mean, this has been just a lesson in Asbury Park, where you are truly one of the icons and legends of this town. And it is. I mean, look, that bumper sticker was correct. So.
Well, you know what? A couple other things tell me. Now, I even brought Eddie Van Halen here. I mean, at one time, Eddie wanted to get involved if we were going to restore the casino building into into a music venue, and that was through Kramer Guitar.
Right, Eddie always that was the big name of Kramer Guitars, right?
Yeah, Eddie Van Halen. Yeah.
All right, so Harry, take us through what happens when the hotel goes bankrupt. Take us through that story.
Okay, after the hotel went bankrupt and it was bought back by the FDIC. This is the same time as the savings and loan crisis really hit hard, and it halted the building on the C8. It halted the entire redevelopment, and Carabetta eventually filed for bankruptcy. Okay. Prior to his filing for bankruptcy, Carabetta brought out the partnership shares of my brother and myself. And he bought us out, and he bought all of our real estate. And we were to receive $9 million, $1 million a year for 9 years. I figure I'm set for life.
Sure.
He went bankrupt, the notes were worthless, never got penny one. The town held Carabetta in default of the contract, and they were going to terminate his contract. They had several meetings, and they reached a settlement agreement. The settlement agreement was negotiated in June of 1993. And the settlement agreement gave Carabetta until October 15th of 1993 to come up with $125 million in financing. And if he did, he could continue the project. If he didn't, the project goes back to the city and Carabetta's gone. They made a settlement agreement, and it was held in trust by an escrow agent, an attorney by the name of Charles Giuliano in Long Branch. And those were the terms of the deal. If he comes up with the money, it comes out of escrow, goes to Carabetta. If he fails, it comes out of escrow, goes to the city. Okay. Enter a new city council July 1, 1993. They fire the redevelopment board and appoint themselves. They fire the attorney, Wentz, Goldman, and Spitzer, and appoint a friend of one of the councilmen with no redevelopment experience as a, quote, redevelopment attorney. Okay. I received a phone call from Joe Carabetta, probably the end of July, 1993. And he says, Henry, he says, I know you know these guys. He says, you got to get me a meeting with them because I'm pretty sure I can get the money, but in case I need a little extension, let's set the groundwork now. So I called up the mayor, who was named Buckley, Dennis Buckley. I asked for a meeting. We had a meeting was set up at the city attorney's office, the new city attorney, not the redevelopment attorney, the city attorney, Raymond Chabelle, and he had just moved out to Ocean Township. And there's a thing called I forget the name of it, but you can only have 2 council members present at one time without an open public meeting. So he's there, and Councilman Chinisi, Buckley, Sam Adio, the city manager, Raymond Chabelle. I'm there with my brother, and Carabetta brings in his planner from Florida and 2 gentlemen from Montreal, Canada, who are, quote, the finance guys. Carabetta grabs hold of the meeting. He said, look, let's cut to the chase. Introduces the finance guy, and they said, here's the problem. Carabetta's in bankruptcy, and the way the Wall Street community views the city of Asbury Park and the way the banking community is not lending money, you're never going to get this project off dead center. But we can. How? He said, myself and my partner have at our disposal $150 million worth of liquid security, cash, bonds, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. We have a hard money lender, which means he's going to lend money against our collateral. He's not loaning money to Asbury Park, he's loaning it against the collateral. They will loan us $125 million against $150 million in collateral. We're then going to take that money, build the building. When the building is built, we can now get conventional financing and eventually pay all the loans back. He says, everybody wins. You win the city, Carabetta wins, we win because we're going to get a little piece of the deal. Sam Adio is ecstatic. Chabelle grabbed me on the way out. He says, Henry, this is incredible. What a great way for these new guys to get in power. They're going to get this thing started. Okay. Unbeknownst to me, one of the councilmen reaches out to the guy in Canada and says, don't give Carabetta any money. We're going to throw him out of town. Give us the money. Let us develop the project the way we want. We don't like his plan. Okay. Now comes a drop dead date. October 15th, Carabetta doesn't have the money. The city, with their new redevelopment attorney, marches up to the bankruptcy court, wants Carabetta thrown out. Carabetta sues the city for tortious interference, and Carabetta wins. A lot of people don't know this. I have the transcript. The judge ruled in favor of Carabetta and said the city, which was supposed to help Carabetta, instead interfered in his ability to get funding. And he took everything out of escrow and gave it back to Carabetta. That's what tied everything up for the next 10 years. Okay? Now, fast forward to 2002. I'm in rough shape financially. I'm in the guitar business and trying to get going again in a little bit of development. And somehow I meet a man named Glenn Fishman. And he had just bought some property from my brother. And he says, I'm trying to buy the tax liens. He says, I'm involved with a major company in New York called MD SAS. And they go all over the country and buy tax liens, which is a very lucrative business. He says, but we can't buy them in Asbury because the judge won't allow them to sell the tax lien because it would deplete the value of the redevelopment, which if it's sold as one parcel has more value than if the tax liens and the land is all dispersed. So I said, would you be interested in buying Carabetta out? He said, of course. Picked up the phone. I said, Joe, I got somebody that wants to buy you out. Next day we have a meeting. Within 1 hour, the deal is made. And they arranged to buy out Carabetta. I then called city attorney, the redevelopment. I called the new city attorney, which is Jim Aaron, not the redevelopment attorney. Told him what's going on, and then that night the city basically approved it, and they set up a company called Asbury Partners, and they bought out Carabetta. And the deal I had, I didn't get a finder's fee, was they're going to give me work. I want demolition work and I want construction work. I'm happy, they're happy, everybody's happy. And I started doing all their major demolition work. I demolished the boardwalk, demolished the casino building. I mean, big projects. And they get into a bind. They had borrowed some money from a company called iStar. They couldn't pay iStar back. iStar forecloses and wipes them out and comes in, and I couldn't even get this much worth of work from iStar. That's where we are today. iStar is a Wall Street big-time firm, and you can see the product that they're building, who they're trying to cater to. And that's the Asbury Park that I don't like.